Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. Press treatment of stories concerning Muslims is a continuing subject of political controversy. The Levison Inquiry into press standards highlighted the repeated distortions of issues to do with the Muslim community by the press. Others have gone further and suggested an institutional Islamophobic bias in sections of the media. Today we're looking back at a series of landmark stories from the last 12 months, and we'll be asking whether or not they reveal a press that is unable to deal with the issues in the Muslim community fairly. Joining me in the studio to discuss these stories are Talha Ahmed, Chair of Membership at the Muslim Council of Britain, Catherine Heseltine, who's CEO of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK, and Mohammmed Dilwar Hussain, Deputy Editor of the Muslim news website 5 Pillars. But before we get into discussion, let's take a look at this report.
Every year, there are approximately 4,000 stabbings in London, but drummer Lee Rigby's assassination was considered by many as a special case, by the government who classified it as a terrorist attack, and by the media that could not control its frenzy. The Woolwich case immediately became a national and international story. BBC's Nick Robinson said the two killers were of Muslim appearance, ignoring that Islam is a religion anyone of any race can subscribe to. For some, Lee Rigby's assassination in broad daylight was also an attack on Britishness, despite the fact that Michael Abedolajo was born in the British capital. The case sparked intense media discussions about Islam and the Muslim community in Britain, but unfortunately, most of them showed deep Islamophobic connotations and tried to establish links between the isolated act of two men and the ideology of an entire community. Many have wondered why the unprovoked brutal stabbing a few weeks earlier of 82-year-old Muslim pensioner Mohammed Salim by confessed racist and anti-Islamist Pavel Lapshin failed to attract the attention of the media and of government. Notably, the careless and admittedly very public murder of British soldier Lee Rigby spurred thousands of column inches in our press and dominated the media for weeks. The convening of an emergency Cobra meeting, the establishment of a government-led extremist task force, and the never-ending parade of public condemnations from all sections of our society, including almost every senior Muslim community figure within the UK. Another topic that put Islam in the headlines was Birmingham's college decision to ban the niqab. The decision ended up being reversed, but it made the niqab a recurrent topic in the following weeks. To spark the discussion even more, a judge ruled stopping a female defendant from taking to the witness stand unless she removed her niqab. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, who supports the removal of the niqab in schools and at airports, ruled out a ban, saying, "This is a free country, and people going about their own business should be free to wear what they wish. I think it is very un-British to start telling people what pieces of clothing they should wear." The Minister, Jeremy Brown, also called for a national debate on the niqab, but no progress has been seen so far.
Well, Catherine, that's a quite depressing litany of stories and their treatment by the press. So let me start by trying to sort of extract some more positive aspect out of it, and that would be that in the aftermath of Woolwich, which, let's face it, those were pieces of footage that probably none of us has ever seen on television before, of somebody who's just murdered somebody, standing there, speaking directly to the camera, blood-soaked hands. It wouldn't have been impossible to imagine a situation where race riots took place or whether there were whole-scale kind of pogroms against the Muslim community. Now, there were attacks on mosques and quite a considerable increase in attacks on Muslims, but in a way that didn't happen. So is the public wiser than the press?
I think depressingly, the good news is that it could have been even worse. There was a huge anti-Muslim backlash, but I think we're on the precipice of what could be a much worse reaction the next time something like this happens, unless obviously, as we talk about, Muslims can help to reverse it. I think it's really interesting to have the opportunity to actually look back over the whole of the past year and see these stories to build up a big narrative the public generally, because there's a common factor between the coverage of Woolwich, niqab, and that Muslims are seen as alien to society, and is threatening, whether that's the threat of violence, which has traditionally dominated stories about Muslims in the media, or the increasing number of stories we have now as Muslims as a cultural threat. No one's saying that niqab is going to cause violence, but they're saying this is against British values. This is a threat to our society, our way of life.
Talha, do you think? The quote that we gave there from Nick Clegg, that people should be allowed to go about their business wearing what they want. It's an astounding environment where that sounds like a radical statement. It's a piece of, it should be almost a banality, but it's a contentious statement.
But I think what's more worrying is that he did say that it started with him supporting various kind of removal. If you take a generic stance on women removing niqab at the witness box, for example, there are serious questions to be asked. Why should there be a generic policy? Muslim Council of Britain supported the decision of the judge that it was the right decision in that circumstance, but any generic positioning that niqab should be banned at a stage when somebody's liberty could be in danger, I think the fact that he felt to if you like, qualify his support for free country and so on with that caveat, I think is disturbing. And that just shows the mindset that has been created by media. And what is, for me, most disturbing is that it's not something new. There are extensive research between 2000 and 2009, and it shows that year on year, the attention focus on Muslim community has increased significantly. For example, in the year 2000, it was only mere few hundred, to 2002 when it increased to 2,000. So it's a huge increase, and year on year it has increased. And you'd have welcomed it, because ideally these should be an opportunity to create better understanding. But unfortunately, all of this, almost 90% or more, focused or portrayed Muslims in a very negative way, setting them against as if they're a threat, an alien to this society, and a threat to the British values. And so when you take all of that in context, I think Nick Clegg missed an opportunity to be more forthwith, more assertive in addressing the situation, which is much more serious.
Mohammed, this is we're focusing on the press, but in actual fact, this is a political narrative that's being driven and has been more forcefully driven over the period of the war on terror. So the politicians are some of the people who've got a lot to answer for, because the press, in a way, are echoing what they're hearing from government, aren't they?
Of course, but I think what our politicians say in Parliament, it goes hand in hand with what the mainstream media portrays to the public. Woolwich was a fine example of the disproportionate coverage of Muslim crime. When the BBC journalist described Michael Adebolajo of Muslim appearance, if you actually looked at Michael Adebolajo, he looks like your mainstream British appearance. Yeah. He didn't have a thobe on, he didn't have a mosque cap on, he didn't have a beard.
He's wearing an anorak and a woolly hat.
And Stone Island. Yeah. So let's be serious about it. He was anything but of Muslim appearance. And when Pavlo Lapshine killed Mohammed Salim and he planned the bomb attacks against the 3 million mosques, just compare that to the coverage it got in comparison to Woolwich. And fine example of Britain's disproportionate coverage of Muslim crime and non-Muslim white crime. And this is, I
think the point to be noted is, in the killing of Mr. Salim, the killer did not stand there and profess himself. So I can understand why initially it may have caused ordinary coverage. When he was convicted, I was expecting a much more coverage on that story. There was some coverage, but unfortunately it wasn't anything that you would...
Because it was revealed to be a political crime. You can argue that Woolwich was a political crime, but so was this killing. It was connected to a
once
series
he was
of
convicted, there is no doubt
and not
that
just of this killing.
Yeah, it wasn't just normal killing. It was evident that this was fueled by Islamophobia. It was fueled by another kind of terrorism that we do not often talk about, a kind of terrorism that is serious and can also take lives in this country.
And if you took the main BBC news report on that evening, it was the fourth story down, the bomber who'd been convicted of murdering this grandfather for no other reason than he was Muslim. And the word terrorism was not used at all in this report. That word seems to be reserved for Muslims.
Of course.
And we seem to have, this this story. But I mean, I think there you have a real story, a news story that was ignored by the media, by and large. But you see with things like the niqab coverage or gender segregation, very much manufactured news stories. They would be total non-stories if they involved anyone other than Muslims. We see.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the gender segregation story, because as Catherine's suggesting, that is in a completely different order. I mean, with Woolwich, something very serious, very graphic did happen. As Talha was saying, the footage was there. No news organisation is not going to do that. But the gender segregation thing, this was something that was generated out of a student organisation with no students in it, backed by the Henry Jackson Society, on the basis of an entirely faulty series of effectively made-up figures, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it actually began when Professor Lawrence Krauss actually refused to sit in a segregated area when he was due to debate Hamza Dorsis of IERA. And then since then, everyone's jumped on the bandwagon. Got ex-Council of Muslims in Britain, National Secular Society, got the likes of Mariam Namazi, you've got our politicians who have jumped on the bandwagon, and this issue wasn't an issue before. And student rights has no authority to be speaking on behalf of students at all. It's a front organisation for Henry Jackson Society, a renowned Islamophobic, pro-Zionist organisation. And
indeed pro-war.
Yeah, of course, I'm pro-war as well.
A number of genuine student societies have passed motions denouncing students' rights and saying that they should have nothing to do with them.
The real student rights. The real student rights, and a fantastic job in actually exposing student rights.
You see, this kind of story, I mean, I think for anybody who has a kind of, a memory of the political stories that the press has made up, it's very much like the ones that were made up in the 70s and the 80s about left-wing local councils, where they were supposed to be banning black sheep and not allowing people to write on blackboards because it was racist and whatnot. I mean, there's a long tradition of the British press just making stuff up.
Exactly, blowing stuff totally out of proportion.
It's not just on that. I mean, the research shows, if you look at the Cardiff University research in 2008, and most recent one at Lancaster University, all of them shows that British media often generate stories about Muslims which are taken out of context, fabricated, exaggerated, and often misleading. One example was given is an interview by Dr. Barry in 2007 when he gave an interview with Telegraph, in which he did not even mention the word Nazi or even Germany or anything of that kind. And the next day, the headlines were that, Britain's Muslim leader comparing Britain to Nazi or that kind of thing. So completely taking things out of proportion. What struck me with the segregation debate is that even people like Polly Toynbee were too keen to support that idea. And yet I couldn't understand how could you justify in British University with the kind of tradition that it has of free debate and so on. I would have thought that you would be encouraging it. After all, nobody is forced to go into these events. You go to them if you choose to. So if I want to have, it's like in my home, if I want to invite you in my home and I expect you to sit in a segregated environment, what's wrong with that? I have every right to do so. What you have right to do is to refuse to go to that event. But if I want to force you to go to it, then you have an issue. But in this issue, nobody forced anybody to go in.
It's the same as with the niqab thing, and it's quite interesting for myself, having been involved, going on as a spokesperson on mainstream news channels, trying to put the arguments against a ban on niqab and to try to put this in context. And actually, if you take the kind of hysteria that's related to it because it's a Muslim thing out of it, it's a very simple, straightforward, as you said, totally non-controversial argument. I mean, I actually debated the MP who was putting forward this bill through Parliament, and I asked him on BBC News, well, are you seriously saying you want our police force going around arresting women because of what they wear instead of chasing people who are committing muggings and serious crime? He didn't have any answer for that. Again, asking him, do you want men in Parliament telling British women what we can and can't wear? But that shows that we're failing to hear those simple universal arguments where these stories should be about equality for all Muslims, non-Muslims. They should be about justice. And instead, as soon as we put the term Muslim in, because this narrative of Muslims always being the baddie, the threat is built up, it turns it upside down. The world's on its head.
Mohammed, just let me ask you one more question before we go to the break. Do you think, that this is now, I mean, we've talked about the connection with the war on terror and, and government policy from that view. Do you think there's another connection here, which is, there's no rational connection between these two things? There's a huge debate about immigration, about Bulgarians and Romanians coming over here. So there's no rational connection between these two discourses. But do you think, in actual fact, what's been created in the public mind is a kind of fear of others, wherever they come from, wherever they do, if they're different from us, undefined, then there's a problem.
John, whilst I appreciate there are similarities that you can draw from the 70s and 80s, but I think the attack against Islam or Muslims in our era right now is a wider political narrative in what's happening abroad. Foreign policy has a lot to play. A big attempt, a big push by the government to actually secularize and water down orthodox Islam. I think all this plays a massive role in how the media portrays Muslims.
On Woolwich, again, we saw the one thing that people made it very difficult for us to come out as Muslims and say, and MPAC spokespeople went on and said, the link is to foreign policy. You cannot ignore the fact that the root cause of this kind of violence is foreign policy, and people like Boris Johnson immediately coming out and going, well, it's wrong to connect it to foreign policy, and it's about this ideology, this Tony Blair, it's a problem with Islam. You have, to take it back and say, actually, this is the narrative that we need to fight, that this is about human rights and oppression and, inevitable human reactions of violence, And we were immediately told, oh, you guys are justifying it. No, it's quite simple that to explain something that's a fact, that security experts acknowledge,
of course,
but it does not fit with government policy or the agenda that a lot of powerful people in the media have.
That is a problem. Any attempt to explain is automatically taken in the sort of poisoned environment of this as an argument for justification.
Precisely. I think what often is missing is that we need to have a debate about the kind of British society that we want, and the role that different people should play, faith communities should play, and unfortunately I think that is missing.
Well, let me just stop you there, because that's precisely the debate that we will be coming up to in the second half of the programme. So do rejoin us after the break, where we'll be revisiting the issue of how the press treats the Muslim community and whether it could be better and different. Hello and welcome back to Analysis. In the first half of the show, we took a look at some of the major stories which highlighted media coverage of Muslims in 2013. In this half, we'll be discussing the impact of these stories on public perceptions. Is Islamophobic sentiment on the rise after Woolwich? Has there been a backlash within the Muslim community? We'll be looking at some of the counter-coverage and positive campaigns within the Muslim community and looking at the year ahead. What will 2014 bring for British Muslims? Rejoining me in the studio are Catherine Heseltine from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK, Mohammmed Dilwar Hussain, Deputy Editor of the 5 Pillars website. And joining us for this half of the show, we also have Massoud Shadjareh, Chair of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and on the telephone, Imam Abdullah Hasan, founder of the campaign Imams to End Domestic Abuse. Welcome back to the programme. Massoud, welcome to the programme for the first time. Let me test your memory here. Can you remember a positive presentation of Muslims in the press in the last year?
Yes, I was just thinking about that. I mean, of course, it's been part of this Islamophobia and promotion of hate, which actually promotes only negativity. And you know, I mean, for example, if a boxer, which is happened to be Muslim, becomes champion, is a British boxer. But if somebody that commits any sort of crime is a Muslim, you know, and that is sort of played out day in, day out. And in reality, that creates the environment where we are facing this high level of hatred towards Muslims. And it's really is becoming quite problematic, because if you really look at this level of hatred and demonization always have either led to ethnic cleansing like Bosnia, or genocide in sort of Germany during the Nazis. And that is really as serious as this whole thing is. And unfortunately, politicians are not a solution, they're part of it, media is a part of it, and you know, the whole society is moving towards that environment where hatred is actually the name of the game and the way forward. And that needs to be tackled, and that's not going to be tackled by just Muslims doing good deeds. It really needs to be a change within the structure of hatred.
Well, let me bring Abdullah in, because Abdullah Hussain, because I mean, in a way, you did try to do a good deed. You started a campaign which was about ending domestic abuse. How did you get on with the media? Did they bite? Was it a story for them?
I mean, we started the Imams Against Domestic Abuse campaign last year. And initially, when we had the launch at the London Muslim Centre in London, there were some media representation there. And we did have some good response. I myself went to the BBC radio and talked about it, talked about domestic abuse within the Muslim community and in the wider society. Also, other Imams went to other media platforms, and they were given some platform to air their views. Recently, we had another conference in London on domestic abuse. Unfortunately, we did contact the media outlets, but we didn't have any representation from the media. So I think, for me, what I've observed is that media sometimes are very selective where they go. So when bad things happen in the UK or in a society, and a Muslim, for example, is behind this bad news, then the media would lash out and jump to the news and say it's a Muslim problem, it's an Islamic problem. But when good things happen, when good Muslims do good things, then the media are very reluctant to come and report them, unfortunately.
Catherine, I mean, you know, Massoud was just saying, you know, it can't be dealt with simply by Muslims doing good deeds, and I suppose it's important to say that nobody does a good deed simply to rectify the presses. I'm sure the campaign that Abdullah's talking about is good in itself. It's not good just because of its impact on the press. But do you think there's some other way of dealing with it? Is there a different way of dealing with the press bias?
Absolutely. We need to understand that this is battle of ideas, of stories going on out there, and engage within the debate in the media, and try to turn it back the right way up, where we it's very easy to sort of feel on the defensive when you're constantly under attack, and we sometimes see Muslims coming out in quite a apologetic way, or you know, or these Muslims are bad, but you know, we're moderate, or yes, I know it's all terrible bad. We've got to be self-confident and say, hang on, we've got nothing to apologise for. We are a community that's under attack. We are a community that's being discriminated against. We're facing constant demonisation, and put these arguments in terms that any human being can understand, that you just, Muslims like everybody else deserve the right to equality, to justice, to for our children to grow up without being labelled as terrorists and extremists and backward people. And there's a huge number of ways that we can successfully get those messages out if we proactively tackle this as a community. And this is where we've got to look at priorities. Do we bury our heads in the sand and hope it's going to go away? Like Massoud said, no, this can only get worse if we don't take action. Or do we become an active community? And narratives, stories can get reversed. Look at the fact that in the 1980s, Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist by mainstream media and politicians. And now, you know, we've just seen his passing, and he's a hero to everybody. So just like the ANC got active and engaged in a PR campaign, Muslims need to do the same. Yeah,
Mohammed, I mean, every community that's been under a target of this kind of treatment has always faced this choice. Yeah. Do you duck or do you stand and fight? And, you know, that, I mean, from American Indians to Jews to the Irish, that's always been a question. But if you say stand and fight, what are the best ways of doing it?
I've always been of the stance that the media attack against Islam or Muslims is different to ones that we've experienced in the past. And the reason that is, again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is because of the wider foreign policy issues in the Muslim world, Iraq, Afghanistan, the unequivocal support of the Zionist state, supporting brutal dictators, and this all has a knock-on effect domestically. In regards to positive campaigns and activities that's happening amongst Muslims, there's loads of positive campaigns. They had a campaign calling for unity and non-sectarianism between Muslim groups. I believe Hizb ut-Tahrir had a campaign, No Muhammad campaign. I believe MPAC had a Stop Islamophobia week. There's lots of good things happening within our Muslim community, but how much of it is given limelight? How much of it is given a positive coverage from the mainstream media? And I've always been of the stance, and this is one of the main reasons why Five Pillars established itself, is that if no one's going to give us the coverage, we will have to do it ourselves. And I think people always, you know, they look to the Jewish community as an example. You know, they stood up themselves, they supported their own media outlets. If we're not going to get any positive coverage from the mainstream media, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And another important factor is that we have to somehow put the right leaders forward to represent us in the media. We don't need people to be apologizing for a crime that was not done in the name of Islam. It was done in the name of foreign policy. So this is something that needs to be addressed. We do not need our so-called representative leaders and our big umbrella organizations to come out and apologize. Apologize for what? How many non-Muslim white people come out and apologize for crimes that are committed by people of white race or Christian faith? You know, and so we need to think about this properly.
Absolutely, and you know, we are not doing this effectively as a community at the moment, because if we look at the fact that organisations like MPAC have been able to get spokespeople into the mainstream news and put these types of arguments, but yet we are not funded by our community to be able to do this on a professional basis. We're relying on volunteers, people who are doing this in between jobs and looking after families, and there is not effective organisation as a community. We have to be professional about this. We have to learn from the way that the Jewish community has organisations that will engage with the media, and they will fund them to do this. We don't understand that. They will pay for...
Massoud, let me ask you this, because, you know, this is now partly debate about what the alternatives are. Do you think that the sort of breakdown of the broadcasting monopoly, I mean, a channel like this would not have been possible 15 years ago. There was a broadcasting monopoly, and satellite television has changed that. Social media has changed how things are reported. Do you think, without overstating the advantages of this, do you think there are advantages that are open now that wouldn't have been in the past because of this?
There are, but I don't think that's really enough. You know, alternative media is alternative media. It's not a mainstream media. You know, we need to reach those people who read the Mail and the Sun and that type of people. And we're not going to reach them with this sort of channels. You know? And so the reality is, what we need to do, we need to change culture. And it's not just holding one or two sort of Islamophobe to account. Indeed, we should, but that's not going to resolve the situation. Change of culture is not just by the news. I mean, we saw how the sort of perceptions and the culture change came, for example, with the issues of homosexuality over the 10 what it was, became completely opposite. It was use of the mainstream sort of, let's say, cultural programs, things like EastEnders and that sort of thing, which actually broke the ice. And then really, we haven't even begun to reach that sort of audiences. And, we're only concerned about getting 5 minutes on the Newsnight or whatever, which really is, how many people watch Newsnight? And then, I think this is really the thing that we need to do. But above all, we need to have, if we're going to liberate our communities, we need to liberate our mind first. The fact is that, many of us, be it leaders or the communities, we actually, our minds are colonized, and we need to decolonize our mind.
Absolutely.
And the reason people like Nelson Mandela were, and the movement in South Africa was successful, was because of the fact that they knew what they were doing, they were committed to it, and indeed they moved forward with all means possible. Our community is really, we got internalization of Islamophobia.
Mohammed, I can see you trying to get in. Just I'll come back to you in just a second, but just let me ask Abdullah about this issue. With your campaign, you told us a little bit about what the mainstream press reaction was like, but what was the reaction of the alternative media like? To what extent were you able to get a hearing and to get publicity because of the existence of social networks?
I mean, the campaign that we've established was not a reaction to what was happening in the news. It was a campaign that many of the Imams that are on board who feel passionate about because of the disease of domestic violence within our community in particular. There was not a reaction to anything that was happening on the news. In terms of publicity in non-mainstream media, in terms of the social networks, we did receive a positive reaction from the public on social media and other media outlets. But as was mentioned, this is not enough. We need to have wider representation within the media, and we don't have the resources in the Muslim community, the manpower to go and make a solid representation in the wider community in the media. Islam Channel and other channels like that are doing some positive work, but when it comes to the wider media, the mainstream channels, unfortunately, the Muslims are not represented sufficiently. 5 minutes, 10 minutes here and there, it's not sufficient. We need to, as a Muslim community, fund institutions, media outlets, ourselves, and create a narrative where Muslims are part and parcel of this country, and we care about the society that we live in, and we don't want the media outlets and the different politicians. We don't want them to provide a false narrative for the Muslim community. We need to create our own narrative in this country.
Mohammed, you were trying to get in there.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is we're all talking about changing the culture. We have to understand Islamophobia, albeit racism, is institutionally built into the British media. And let's be serious, when the BBC or whoever calls a Muslim onto their show, they nitpick who they call onto their show. So we have the likes of Majid Nawaz, someone who's very much despised amongst the Muslim community.
From the Quilliam Foundation.
From the Quilliam Foundation. We have Anjem Choudhury, who isn't your most popular speaker amongst the Muslim community. So the BBC, when it chooses the Muslim representatives, they choose them from the two most extreme spectrums. So I think they do this on purpose, and they do this on purpose to create a certain narrative, a certain atmosphere. The Muslim community has many positive, capable Muslim representatives, but it's whether the mainstream media wants to give them an opportunity. Two cringeworthy examples was when Mohammed Omar of the president of Falsis appeared on BBC debating the gender segregation. And then Dr. Nazri Nawaz of Hizb ut-Tahrir appeared on Channel 4. They were pounced on. They weren't given an opportunity to say what they wanted to say. And again, this is an example of how these are established news anchors, Jon Snow, the BBC, they're selecting people to come onto their show, and they're given 10, 15 minutes to speak, and even then they're rudely interrupted. They're not treated with respect. So realistically, racism, Islamophobia is intrinsically built into British media. And to change that, we have to really address the movers and shakers of society. Do we really see the likes of Murdoch changing his stance in reporting
Although
news.
we have seen that anti-Semitism was institutionalised within the British political and media, you know, if you look back decades, and now, you know, nobody would dare to say the kind of things about the Jewish community that they say about Muslims. So we must understand that, inshallah, you know, that success is for Allah to grant us, but we must make those efforts. And I completely agree with Massoud that, you know, there are many different ways from getting Muslims represented in you know, soap operas and dramas or different cultural things, to the news side, to us all being citizen bloggers on the social media that can make our voices heard. But the biggest barrier is this mindset barrier, this colonized Muslim mindset that accepts our inferiority, that accepts that we're always going to be on the bottom of the pile and kicked around, and doesn't see that truth and justice is central to what it means to be a Muslim, that we stand up, that we have that Muslim struggle for justice, just as, you know, you said Nelson Mandela and his movement had a struggle, a mass political struggle, where they understood their own story.
Well, that's the point, isn't it, Massoud? That you know, that we can talk about the biases, and their points. There are points well made about the institutional structures and so forth, but there isn't really a kind of media strategy on its own. I mean, the ANC turned opinion because it was involved in township boycotts, because it was involved in mass strikes, because there were protests and marches. The civil rights movement in the United States, it threw up Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, but they were representatives of a mass movement on the ground. Now, if you want to do that, then when something like the killing in Birmingham happens, there's got to be a response on the streets which puts you in the media.
Yeah, but even when you go to media, I mean, I remember exactly the point. You know, I was on a sort of Sky News at that particular time, and I was saying that, you know, the village wasn't a sort of terrorism act as we had 2 weeks before. A Muslim elderly was hacked to death, and the presenter said, no, this is terrorism, because they were shouting Allahu Akbar. I mean, you know, you really, and it's not just the media. I wish it was just the issue of media. Politicians are promoting day in, day out. Even Muslim politicians are actually jumping on the same bandwagon of demonizing our community, blaming the victims for. I mean, you know, whatever we do. I mean, the program that the brother is involved in, you know, they would take it and twist it. They will take it and say that, you know, look, they're doing domestic violence because domestic violence is rife in the Muslim community. The reality is that it's not.
Well,
there's no more or less domestic violence.
Let me just ask Abdullah, was that, in fact, one of the reactions that you got to the campaign? Hey, you're doing this because your community's like this anyway.
There was some reports that, you know, this is a Muslim problem, that domestic violence is only a Muslim problem and is sanctioned by Islam, and Muslims are, you know, Muslim men are violent against Muslim women within our community. But if you look at the statistics and in a society in the UK, you know, it's not a religious problem. It's a societal problem where, you know, non-religious communities are affected by domestic violence than religious communities. So I agree with the brother that, you know, unfortunately there are a lot of media outlets, they want to, you know, demonize and attack the Muslims and make this particular issue and many other issues a Muslim problem. And we know for sure that it wasn't a Muslim problem. And also I agree with the other brother when he said when, you know, Muslims, when things happen in the UK, the right Muslims, if you like, they're not contacted by the media. They always go to Majid Nawaz from the Green Foundation or Anjem Chaudhary, who do not represent, you know, 1% of the, you know, reasonable Muslim community within the UK. So why do the media select these people when we have capable people within the community? For example, MCB, yes, there are problems within the MCB with like any other organization, but they do represent to a large extent the Muslim community. And I'm sure they have capable people to represent the Muslim community. Why don't the media go to them
Well, let me just ask Mohammed about that, because I mean, you made this point originally, but I think it's one of the things that needs to be challenged is that there is a culture in news reporting that a good fight is what good television's about. If you get two extreme views and they, you know, bash each other about in the studio for 3 minutes, that's good viewing. But if somebody talks in a knowledgeable and in-depth way for 3 minutes, that's tedious.
Of course. We need to understand that the mainstream media and our politicians are in bed with each other. We knew that Tony Blair was very close to the Sun. In effect, the Sun basically won Labour its election, and similarly, David Cameron has got very close ties to the media. So it's not necessarily the media to blame in isolation or our politicians. It goes hand in hand. And yeah, it's great to watch two people of two extreme spectrums to bash each other, but not necessarily actually address the issue in hand. And I just want to address a point Mr. Massoud made. There are Muslim perceptions in mainstream media. We've got Citizen Khan, and we've got the Massoud family in EastEnders. And this is the kind of Muslims that the mainstream media is trying to portray. And let me just say something about the Massoud family in EastEnders. Within that family, you've got an homosexual, an adulterous husband, and all kinds of madness. And of course, I'm sure everyone's aware of.
So they're one of the more adjusted families in EastEnders.
So all the madness that happens in Albert Square happens in the Muslim family in 1 week, you know. And then we've got Citizen Khan, an absolute atrocious example of what a Muslim family should be. Very poor comedy.
I mean, that is an incredible throwback to, I mean, the kind of comedy that you thought had disappeared shortly after Benny Hill. Really.
What is acceptable with Muslims, you know, we've moved on 20, 30 years. For other minority communities, you can't do the same kind of thing. But this is where
I'm going to have to stop you there because we've got just a few seconds left. But I'd like to thank all my guests for that informative debate. I hope that you enjoyed the analysis, and I hope you'll be rejoining us both for the final episode this year and in the new year. Hello and welcome to Analysis's yearly roundup. During the show, we'll be going over some of the major events which have rocked the Muslim year. This isn't the right auto cue. No. This isn't the one that I sent back to... Yeah, because I just got rid of that bit that's difficult to say in the first sentence, so that's good. Hello and welcome to Analysis's roundup of the most important news stories of the past year. Hello and welcome to Analysis's roundup of the most important news stories of the past year. The fledgling democracy in Egypt was swept away after a military coup ousted President Mohamed Morsi in July. Since then, the military government has engaged in a crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters, and increasingly against radicals who first launched the revolution against dictator Hosni Mubarak in 2011. Many claim Egypt is now facing a counter-revolution. In November, the analysis team travelled to Bosnia to witness the uncovering of a mass grave at Tomasica in Prajor, the largest of its kind in the country. The bodies recovered from the grave are victims of the brutal war that ripped through Bosnia in the 1990s and could be used as evidence in the prosecution of war criminals. Violence has continued to be meted out against the Rohingya Muslims in Burma, with protests spreading to involve Muslims in other parts of the country. The Burmese state has been criticised for not doing enough to quell the violence, and the Muslim world has looked on in horror as what was supposedly a new democracy is engulfed in ethno-religious violence. There were few left unmoved by the chemical gas attack that claimed over 1,000 lives in Syria. With the war reaching new heights of brutality, the United States and the UK threatened to intervene in the conflict. But an unprecedented vote against military action in the House of Commons prevented military intervention by the UK, and then the US followed suit. Join us after the break when we'll be looking at more of the highlights of this year's news and current affairs calendar, including the now notorious murder of drummer Lee Rigby in Woolwich. Hello and welcome back to Analysis's yearly roundup, where we're looking. Hello and welcome back to the Analysis yearly roundup, where we're looking at some of the major stories of 2013. This month, Michael Adjibalajo and Michael Abouale were convicted of the murder of drummer Lee Rigby in June. Footage of the murder captured by Adjibalajo on his... Sorry, I have to do that again. Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah. Hello and welcome back to the Analysis Programme's yearly roundup, where we're looking back at some of the major news stories of 2013. This month, Michael Adjibalajo and Michael Abouale were convicted of the murder of drummer Lee Rigby in June. Footage of the murder, captured on a passers-by camera, shocked and horrified the nation. Anti-Muslim violence increased in the aftermath of the attack, and questions were raised both about the government's anti-terror legislation and whether British foreign policy could be held responsible. The row over gender segregation on university campuses has hardly been out of the news headlines either, with many questioning whether public money should be going to institutions which allow the separation of men and women. But questions have also been raised over the right to religious freedom and political expression, with many pointing out the voluntary nature of the arrangements and being respectful of the role that women play in Muslim communities. The controversy over how Europe treats asylum seekers is ever present in the media. The continuing flow of refugees fleeing the conflict in Syria has put pressure on neighbouring countries to try and accommodate millions of newly homeless people. But the refugees are also finding themselves turned away at the borders of European Union countries. The treatment of African migrants in Greece, the first stop for many fleeing the continent, has provoked tensions in the austerity-stricken country. Finally, the year also saw the passing of a giant, Nelson Mandela. His life meant so much to so many people around the world, including many in the Muslim world. In particular, comparisons were drawn between the anti-apartheid struggle and the struggle for Palestinian self-determination in the Middle East. So that's it for now. I hope that you'll rejoin the Analysis team in the new year, when we'll be tackling more of all the big stories, both here in the UK and around the globe. Please do rejoin us in 2014. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to Living the Life with Sadia Chowdhury.
And Sabir Bhatti, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, our guest tonight is a talented film director who really is an all-rounder. He loves making movies, he loves travelling, he's also a great sports fan.
That's right, and he's here to discuss with us his latest documentary film. It's called British and Muslim, The Story of Islam in Norfolk. We'll be finding out more with him and giving you sneak previews of the documentary. Let's introduce him. Luqman Heron is with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
And how are you this evening?
I'm very, very well. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. Luqman, he's a very talented guy.
Yeah, all-rounder, like we said. Looking forward to discussing with you everything about your documentary.
Yes.
So he'll be joining us shortly. Now, if you're in Egypt and looking for a way to learn a new skill or a new art, then the Al-Rasif Centre might be the place to visit. It's a new cultural centre that's been launched by a group of Egyptians to bring young people together.
Egypt's growing population produces thousands of graduates every year who struggle to find work in an increasingly depressed economy. It is hoped this new centre can help young people find creative solutions in their search for a sense of purpose. Rian Clemenson has more on the story for us.
On the onset, it looks a bit like a regular youth centre or a coffee place. Look a little closer and there's something striking going on here. This is a place where young people can express themselves. Whether taking lessons from others to perfect an art, or passing your own skills down. From performing to simply exchanging ideas, young Egyptians say initiatives